Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth DiAlto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that's always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value, especially in the context of everything that falls under the topics of healing, growth, leadership, and creativity. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. I'm the creator of a practice called Wild Soul Movement. My flagship year-long online women's circle is called Power. I run virtual new moon circles every month, weekend workshops all over the planet throughout the year, and I work with clients one-on-one. I also started doing stand-up comedy for fun in 2018. So this is a place where you can come with your multiple talents and passions to be encouraged, nourished, and cultivated. There's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show also aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. The main intention here is to contribute to creating a kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths, and they trust in themselves and in life and recognize that we need each other. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth DiAlto. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating or review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here, and here we go. What's up, everybody? This is episode number 325 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth DiAlto, and this is our last interview of 2019. Next week, we start the journey into the wild soul, which I'll say more about in a moment. But first, today's guest is someone I was looking forward to having on the show all year. Her name is Adrienne Maree Brown, and her book, Emergent Strategy, is one that I keep nearby to flip through like an oracle deck ever so often to be inspired, ignited, and reminded of who I am and what I'm here to do, and also how I'm here to do it. So a quick note before we get into the interview, Adrienne travels a lot for teaching and facilitating and actually had to get ready for a flight during our interview. So there is some background noise. However, it didn't impact her level of presence at all, and the conversation is golden. So now that that's out of the way, her big truth was that she's going to die. And that sparked a conversation around how things move and what really matters to her. So we talked about humility and curiosity and doing separate from productivity, meaning how can you do what you want to do with the time you have? We talked about how we're all socialized under capitalism and the impact that has on how we connect and relate to one another. She shared how she maintains a healthy nervous system as she navigates becoming more visible in her work. We discussed rigor and not just getting people to do their work, but to stay in it, which also led to a discussion of shame and accountability. And finally, we geeked out on cymatics and embodiment, which you all know I love. So I really loved this chat. I hope you will too. Share it up. Find us on Instagram. Let us know what you thought. Use it to have discussions with your loved ones. You know the drill. The show notes are at untameyourself.com/325. So you can find links to Adrienne, all her stuff, her books, and everything like that. And drum roll. Next week, we kick off this year's Journey into the Wild Soul. For those of you who've been podcast listeners for a while, you know that I have been doing something or other every year for the last 4 years to help people close out the current year and go into the new year with a bunch of focus, clarity, momentum, inspiration, all of which comes from being deeply connected to yourself. So we take some stock of your inner world to help you have a better outer world experience. And what we also do is we gather as a community. If you've really been around for a while, you know that I used to have private, free Facebook groups where for many years our community connected, got to meet with each other, reflect, share things. And a couple years ago, I stopped doing those because it was just a super enormous amount of space to hold. So, but around this time of year, last year, I started doing it as a pop-up. So we gather up together, coinciding with the journey. I open up a Facebook group for just 6 weeks so that we can discuss the podcast episodes, geek out together, connect in some cases, reconnect in others. So to join this year's journey, to get an invite into that Facebook group and access, go to wildsoulmovement.com/journey 2020. That's wildsoulmovement.com/journey 2020. You can join the pop-up Facebook group, say hi, introducing yourself. Listen, unless you're someone who likes to lurk, and lurkers are always welcome in my spaces. Do what you need to do, get what you need to get out of it. I know not everyone loves participating in those conversations, but can get a lot out personally just from observing. So that's always welcome as well. So next week we kick off the journey. It's going to be amazing. I always love gathering up with you all, reflecting, sharing. There's so much exciting stuff. The theme of the journey this year is wholeness. So we're going to be talking about integrating all of the parts of ourselves throughout the course of the journey this year, which is a really beautiful thing. During the journey, we'll do an embodiment challenge. That's going to happen in December. So I'll be giving you some tools and practices and guiding you through actually getting out of your head and into your bodies in a beautiful, sustainable ways that you can use all the time, not just ending a year and going into a new year. So I'll stop rambling about it now. You all know I'm just excited. So again, wildsoulmovement.com/journey 2020 if you want to take that ride with us this year. And now let's get into our interview with Adrienne. Y'all, I am so excited. I've literally been looking forward to this interview for months, and I don't get this giddy. No offense to other guests. I don't get this giddy about a lot of interviews, but I really am for this one. So we have Adrienne Maree Brown with us. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello. And it's so funny because I had this working list. I usually don't, I like to ask a couple of guiding questions to start the interview and just flow from there. But because I love your book, Emergent Strategy, so much, I actually had some specific questions I wanted to ask you. Okay. And I just couldn't find it. I couldn't find my list this morning. I don't know where I put it. And I was like,
oh,
right,
wow.
But we're going to be fine.
It just has to be emergent.
That's right.
It has to be. It just has to be.
I'm like, all right, I guess it just has to be exactly how the process works. So, but the first thing I've been loving asking people this year is, how's your body? How do you feel today in your bones and in your skin?
Ooh, I like that question. I'm actually feeling really good in my bones and my skin right now. I just had, I've had a week. So the past few weeks, I was finishing the first draft of a new book on facilitation and mediation. And it's been a journey. And so the process for me of writing a book is a pretty intense journey. And so then I finished it and I was like, okay, I got to take care of myself, like instantly take care of myself and kind of recover. So this week I've had 2 sessions with a new acupuncturist who does like more traditional methods and like manipulates the needles inside the body, and really intense work that like makes your muscles twitch and release their knots and all this stuff. So I feel the benefit of all that release in my system. And then I also just went to see a chiropractor. I went to see my doctor. And I got, my sweetheart came to visit. I got a lot of good loving. So my body is feeling really good and centered and, ready. I'm about to head out for a month of more travel. And it helps me when I'm able to do that kind of deep recentering and resetting the body before I have to go on those long journeys.
Yeah.
Because I know it's going to be like one plane ride after another.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've got, I think, some good technology for plane rides and stuff like that as well. So I'm feeling good.
I
How
love
about
that.
you? How's your body?
My body's great. I love salsa dancing. Is my work is embodiment, so I'm doing all kinds of
Uh-huh.
movement every day. But I love salsa dancing. That is my biggest joy. And this past weekend, I had like two of my favorite nights of dancing that I've literally had in my whole 11 years that I've been salsa dancing, and
Wow.
it's like still reverberating. It feels so good. So my
That's
body's
awesome.
good today. Thank you for asking that back.
Yeah.
Um, so then the other question I always like to start out with, which I feel like is probably a ridiculous question to ask you because I'm sure there's so many, but what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
Mm. Truth that's been having a big impact on my life right now is that I'm going to die.
Mm.
um, like I've been really sitting with it in a new way. I think we all go through these moments of like, oh, mortality. That's like a thing. And last year, a person that I really admired and looked up to passed away, and I got to be fairly close to her journey, her transition journey, and it was just this really intense, beautiful community thing, and it really put me in a different orientation to death and mortality and like how these things move. And so it's kind of shifted my orientation around my own mortality and like what is it that really matters to me, what do I need
Mhm.
to do. And you know, I feel really really fortunate. Like most of the time I feel like I'm a very lucky woman because I found something that was really satisfying to me as a life work.
Yeah.
And I found it early and I was good at it. And then I found emergent strategy inside of that, which made sense to me and I could communicate it to others.
Hmm.
And then I found pleasure activism, which same thing, like it made sense to me and I could communicate it to others who needed it. And so it feels like I've been blessed, you know, like I've had a lot of hardship in my life, but when it comes to these areas that are like, you know, how do you know that you can be satisfied by your life? I feel very satisfied by what
Yeah.
I've been able to do and produce in my life. And now I'm feeling like, okay, what is the next thing? What is the next calling? And I'm going to take a sabbatical and get still so I can hear it, you know, like
Yes.
what is it
Yes.
that I'm meant to do next? Um, but you know, that feeling of like, I'm not going to be here forever. So am I doing what I want to do with the time that I have? Feels really important. And like, you know, losing people helps you really get in right relationship with that because you see how quickly it goes and what matters at the end. And very little of it is like to-do lists for other people.
Right.
So I feel like that's been dropping in me, you know, like I'm like, oh, like perhaps my purpose in life is not answering your emails and
Right.
doing everything that everyone else wants me to do. Like perhaps, you know, and I'll say like so far, the times when I have said no to what other people wanted from me and said yes to something that was emerging inside of me, it's gone well. So that also feels like a blessing. Like I think if I was in a situation where emergent strategy had tanked or no one was interested in the ideas of it, I might answer that question really differently. But right now, it's like, okay, I've done some things that feel really good, and I'm not going to live forever.
Yeah.
So, you know, how do I keep my attention on the right things?
I love this and I super relate because it's just over 6 years ago now is when like my path really opened up. And my
Mm-hmm.
like life's work revealed itself to me very in a very emergent way. And
Uh-huh.
that does. I constantly feel so fortunate. One of the things I added into my work this year was doing Akashic Records readings. And
Mm.
the first question, like 80% of people ask me, is what's my purpose?
Yes, that's
And
right. I was like, what am I doing here?
I
Like,
know.
help me.
And so I really resonate with you saying, I feel like immensely blessed that in terms of like vocation, that's clear for
Yeah.
me, because I know for a
Yeah.
lot of people, the biggest struggle on their path is that.
Yes, that's
Um,
right.
but in what you were saying, I really appreciate that even though there's this like, what do I want to do? And you use the word do several times, it doesn't feel like there's an enormous attachment to productivity. And I might just be making
No,
that up.
no, I feel like that I broke kind of out of that, or I break out of that again and again. But like,
Yeah.
because I think what happens is I come up with something that needs to be like,
Yeah.
emergent strategy needs to be, it needs to exist, it needs to be articulated, and I can do that. So I do that. And then it's a tricky path, because then you get on that doing, and then you're like, oh snap, now I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of roll yourself back, like, okay, wait, now it's nice. Now I can say emergent strategy exists. Like,
Yeah.
it's been articulated. My view on it is that it always existed, and that I got the honor of uncovering it.
Yeah.
But or uncovering like a modern interpretation of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel great in that, like, oh, I got to do that in my lifetime, and now what's the next thing that's going to come? What's the next thing that wants to be unveiled
Yeah.
through me?
It feels like stewarding to me.
Yeah, I think of it as like, I'm not the first, and I'm not the last, and here I am. And what a blessing to get this assignment, this like very sacred assignment.
Yes.
Because it requires paying so much attention and changing how I pay attention and changing how others pay attention. So, now I'm taking on the role of like more of what I would describe as teacher, like, which is something I wasn't comfortable with for a very long time. The idea that others might approach me as a teacher, I was just like, that sounds really weird, because I'm a facilitator. And the work of facilitation is so different, or it felt so different to me from the work of teacher. I feel like my work for such a long time was like hold other people, so I came into the work, and very clearly, very quickly, early on in my life, was like, oh, other people have such brilliant ideas, and they're so passionate about so many things, but they can't hear each other. I can help them hear each other. I should do that, And now I feel like I've spent a good amount of time in that zone, and I feel like I understand some of the key patterns around what helps people to hear each other, and what keeps people from hearing each other. And so now it feels like a next piece of work, emerges in me that I'm excited to do. And I wish that for everyone, like if I was going to say like, here's my one dream for all human beings, it would be to feel like, oh, there's something that's in me that's an offer, and that can be of good use to other people. And I found it, and I did it.
Yeah.
And there's a freedom that comes on the other side of that. I feel less obligation every day. And that means my work is coming from, I think, a better place than when I have sourced my work from obligation, it runs out. That is a limited resource.
Yeah, I love this. So many years ago, and I'm so big. Actually, can I say something I appreciate about your work? Literally, the way you write, you cite your sources better than like anyone I've ever seen, and
thank you.
That is something
that matters to me.
It really matters to me as well. And so it always bugs me when there's this prayer I've been saying for so many years, and I've literally Googled endlessly to be like, where did this originally come from? And I can never find it. But it's use me, move me, make me a force for expansion, for love, and for good. And I feel like what you were just describing, it's that, right? It's like, I'm an instrument, God, sometimes it's more specific. It's like, God, use my mouth, sometimes before I teach or facilitate or even get on the show, I'm like, use my mouth. And sometimes things come out of my mouth. I'm like, damn, I said that. And I'm like,
That's right. That's right.
You said the prayer.
That's right. And I get blown away. I feel the same way often, that I'm like, blown away by something that comes through that I'm like, I didn't know that I knew that, or that I thought that, or that I felt that.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful that I was usable in that way.
Yes. Yes.
And then, I look at so many of the people that I look up to were also in the practice of some kind of sacred surrender.
Yeah.
And I feel like, oh, that's the thing that I'm trying to be really good at now, is like surrendering to those powers that are larger and more older, like it's like both older
Yes.
than myself and tapped into something that is more continuous than just my short life.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's clicked through for me, that I'm like, I'm not going to live forever. And that's not actually, that wouldn't be a good thing. So here's the time that I have, and how can I pick up like the best threads that are moving through our species and
Yes.
advance them. And, I think like lately I've been thinking about that. Like, I love being at some kind of spiritual intersection between Harriet Tubman and Lao Tzu.
Mm-hmm.
And like, they didn't get to meet each other, but they get to meet in my mind, and
Yes.
they get to meet in like the work of my lifetime. And I don't know that there's any way that Harriet Tubman would have come across the Tao Te Ching, but there's like universal truths in it that she was advancing. And, there's stuff like that I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'm glad to sit in a place where I can see that. And then I imagine like down the line somewhere, someone will see the work that I'm doing and the work of some scholar that I have no access to or no way to know exists right now, and be able to make that connection. Like that kind of stuff really excites me. It really makes it still exciting to be a human being, that we're not too vast to, or we're not so connected, like the internet and everything. It's like we're not so connected that we can't still have that kind of mysterious, magical overlapping and crossing of paths.
I love this. As you were saying that, I was getting this image in my mind of like, who's my table? And it's like Jesus, Rumi, Brene Brown, bell hooks, like all these different,
right.
this like range of people. So something that you said I love so much. Earlier this year, I did this content development group for a book that I'll probably write eventually, but not anytime soon, around communication. And what I found was the anchor to all of it was curiosity, because I observe a lot, and I watch what happens on the internet. And it's interesting around activism. I watch people online and on Instagram and on Facebook, and I watch how these conversations that are so important that need to be happening really go south a lot because of the forum, because of the platform, right?
Yeah.
Especially in writing, where there's not a lot of nuance or context, where there's not inflection, where you can't actually feel people. I watched these conversations that could be so productive and beautiful go south. And so the curiosity piece was huge to me. And so when you were saying this thing about helping people hear each other, one of the things I had written down as I was flipping through Emergent Strategy this morning was, I know you're big on humility and curiosity. And to me, that's what like curiosity comes from. Genuine curiosity comes from such a humble place. So I'd love if you could dig in a little bit more. Any way you want to explore this that feels like kind of like ripe and exciting for you right now, around why don't people hear each other, and how are humility and curiosity balms for that? BALM.
I like this question. I feel, when I'm facilitating groups of people, what you see laid out pretty clearly is socialization, right? Like, oh, like folks have been really socialized not to listen to each other with curiosity or humility, because that's not how capitalism functions. Right. Capitalism is like, you, as you're listening, you need to constantly be inserting yourself into the narrative. Mm-hmm. And as you're listening, you need to be figuring out like which aspects of it are yours, that you can purchase, that you can move, that you can claim, that you can take. So sitting in a meeting full of people who've been socialized that way can be really hard.
Yeah.
Because you've got really good intentions so often, but what's manifesting, what's coming out of people's mouths and hearts is like not helpful, and not towards collaboration. Mm-hmm. So then the idea of humility, as I've learned it, is like, it's actually not even, like, I'm just like, people say it and it makes it seem like it's such a big deal, but it's like, to me, it's like, this is just how we should be oriented towards the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is much cooler than we are. It is much more amazing than anything we've come up with. And so this should just be our base level orientation to it. And I think that for me, when that broke through, that I'm like, oh, even people now, I will hear like use being humble as another way to practice ego.
Right.
And I'm like, like, we've gotten off course. So
like the whole concept of humble bragging, right?
Humble bragging, right? Like, and I get it, right? Because there's still, it's not like I'm above any of these things. I'm like, I'm still a human being. I want people to like me. Like, I want people to think that I'm succeeding in life,
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about, I'm trying to think of how to say this precisely, like caring about the collective insofar as you're contributing to it. Yes. But not caring about what other people think about you, or not like shaping your personality and like what you're here to do on earth based on what people think of you.
Yeah.
So I find for me, humility is the thing that keeps me right at that intersection where it's like, I do care about what people think about me. And every day I try to care about that a little less, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in that sense of just like, do they like the outfit that I wore? And, I try to instead source it like, do I like the outfit that I wore?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then also staying in touch with that collective common humanity and feeling into like, okay, there's something here that is greater than me and that can be served. How do I serve it best? And, the answer has been many things. The answer was emergent strategy. The answer was visionary fiction. The answer was pleasure activism. And for me, the answers that keep coming are, this is how we practice being in right relationship with each other at a collective level, and not just I get to experience pleasure and I get to experience my ego being stroked.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other piece of this that you can tell people and they won't believe you, but I swear by this, and I try to tell people as quickly and as often as I can, you will not be satisfied by what other people think of you ever, ever, right? And I have the great gift of having been successful pretty young in my life in the ways that I was taught were important. Like folks, at a fairly early age, people were asking me to run organizations or to start projects or to step into leadership. And so, I have not spent much of my life in a place where I was like, I want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
I have spent a lot of my life in places where I'm like, oh shit, people are looking at me.
Yeah.
I better act like I know what I'm doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that distinction is a massive one. Like it's
Yeah.
a really different place. And so what I see a lot is people who are like, I want to be seen, and that's shaping their behavior, their choices, their communications, their heart,
Yeah.
And then when you get there and you're like, everyone's looking at me, it's like, this is not the greatest thing. Like, this is not the greatest thing, is the nicest way I can put that. This isn't what I thought it was going to be like. And I'm not really enjoying it, and it's not like all of it's shitty, but like, there's a lot of it that's just like, oh, like you recognize how shallow that kind of attention can be.
Totally.
And how, it's very frustrating, especially if you're like, I'm trying to move something that really matters to me. And, even now I'll get that frustration where I'm like, I'm trying to move something that really matters to me. And y'all are like, post another selfie,
Right.
And I'm trying to, like, I just saw Lakeith Stanfield, who was star of Atlanta and has done a lot of film work that I really enjoy. But he posted this thing on social media about this man who is on death row right now and is slated to be executed in November.
Reed, right?
And Robert Reed. And he posted the picture, or no, he posted like a thing that was like, pay attention to this, basically, like, please pay attention to this. And don't just sign the petition, but we actually need you to like call in. Like, if you really want to make a difference on this issue, you have to call. Like, it's not enough to just sign something. And so he makes this really beautiful post, and it's just like, powerful and thoughtful and like all the stuff you would want from this post. And then the next post he put was like him. I don't even know if it's a real picture of him, but it's him like looking back over his shoulder at his butt, and he's got like his butt out, and it's just hilarious, right? And so he says, I know this is what you want, and all of you are going to look at this and like this. Now look back to the post I just put right before this one. That's what I actually want you to look at, right?
Love that.
And I love it both as the action, right? Like I remember one of my friends, Tanjila Islam, I was doing an action with her once, and she was like, I'm going to wear this little mini skirt that's going to say the political message I want on my butt, because no one is looking at me and I want them to like pay attention to this. And it's just like, what do we have to do? How do we get attention and then move it to where we want it to be?
Yeah.
And I think the work of organizing, the work of meditation, the work of narrative shifts, the work of narrative building, it's all that work, right? Like we're all trying to do the same thing of like, let me get your attention and then move it to something, and hopefully most of us are like, I want to move it towards something just. I want to move it towards something better than what we have now. And I want to move it to people who deserve it and are not getting it. And I feel like, that is to me a huge portion of like what I'm up to.
Yeah. And I love all these different points you made, because this is something. So in the last couple of years, as I've been integrating more awareness around social justice, liberation, and things like this into my work and my platform, I've had to do a bunch of experimentation with like what's appropriate for me, what's my lane, what works, what's effective. And one of the things that I realized is social media is not the place for me. This podcast is the place for me, because people can listen to the conversations, they can share them with their friends, they could be conversation pieces, they can think about it and not have to do it in a way that is as confronting as social media, which, like you're describing, can be so confusing. So I love this idea of how do we get attention and then move it to where I want it to be. So earlier this year, I do embodiment work. So I started posting these movement videos, which often for me are dance videos. And people are like, this brings me so much joy. And then they're like paying attention and they're sharing that. But then in the caption, I'm writing kind of like what you're saying. I'm like, have you thought about this? Are you connected to your body in this way? Have you thought about moving to the music of your cultural roots to connect with your ancestors? Like we can lay in all these other things. And I think that's really brilliant and a really great way to strategize around this really interesting, weird social, everyone has a platform, everyone is a brand, like thing that is also emerging.
No, it's such a trip. I remember this like way, way back. One of the very first things I was ever involved in was my friend Chaika Omawale, who's like a creative genius, pulled me in to do this work around HIV/AIDS. And she, I think, used the term edutainment for it.
Yeah.
But the idea was like, I'm going to get you, we would do these concerts, and it was like John Legend. There was just all these people who would come to these concerts, the Anomalies, Tamar Kali, and it was just these outrageously talented people. And they would come and do these concerts. And then the purpose of these concerts was that we were raising awareness about the HIV/AIDS crisis in Brooklyn. And I remember looking back and like so much of that still informs everything else that I do, which is like people want to be whole. They want to be having a good time. They want to be playing with each other. They miss each other. They long for each other.
Yes.
They want to feel good about their contribution to the world. And not everyone's meant to do every single part of it. So like not everyone's going to become an organizer for the sake of that feeling good. Yeah. So then I'm like, so my work, in some ways is how do I remove the barriers of entry to people who are like, I really want to be here. Sorry, I'm zipping up my suitcase. To folks who are like, I really want to be here and I really want to be a good person. And I'm also like caught up in all the stuff that I'm doing. And it's like, okay, cool. How can I make it as easy as possible for you to enter and as highly likely as possible for you to stay? And so I think about that framing still is like, I want to get you in the door and then I want you to stay in the door. And that means I'm not a big fan of what I think is another common move right now, which is, I think there's a way to build analysis in people when they walk in the door that isn't punishing. And then I think there's ways to do it that are punishing. And because again, ego is like, I somehow need to be better than anyone else who's walking through this door.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't need, for me, I'm always in a question about that, right? Because I'm like, well, there's stuff that's transphobic, but the fact that I know that there's stuff that's transphobic doesn't make me better than people who are transphobic, because I only learned that stuff was transphobic because I did stuff that was transphobic.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like, for me, I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful that there were people who were patient with me, and that's the practice I want to be in. Is I want to be someone who finds the folks that I'm interested in bringing through the door, and then I'm patient and gracious with those people, rather than like come through the door, oh, wow, you're really whack, which I feel like I see so often now. And I'm like, oh, like, who taught us to be ungenerous? Who gave us permission to be ungenerous with each other in that way? And, and where does rigor enter the conversation? Because I'm a rigor fiend. Like, I love scholarship of the right kind. And for me, the right kind has been science fictional, has been embodiment, has been really studying the work of Audre Lorde. Like, there's certain people that I'm like, I'm into this person or I'm into this thing. And I think it's part of my calling to move it. And I'm like, that scholarship to me is so much more interesting than when I was trying to, again, organize my life around what someone else told me was the cool or right thing to think about or study or pay attention to. And it's not, there's certain things I'm like, you do have to contend with. You do have to contend with some of these big ideas if you're going to be a politically astute human being. But then there's a lot of other stuff out there that also needs to feed into it. Like, if I had ignored my passion for ants, which nobody thought was a great idea to pay attention to when I started paying attention to it, I wouldn't necessarily be where I am today. And I think movement would suffer in some ways by that. Like, by not, because it's not just my attention, but like, my attention was moved by others and now is moving others. And now the same thing with orgasm, as I'm just like, it's actually really important that we attend to the pleasure of people who are trying to change the world, and that they are able to reclaim that in themselves. Like, I want to be a part of growing that and making that happen,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that you brought up this point. It's something that's come up in a couple other podcast conversations, and it always bears repeating of what gets people to stay, right? And and I like that you use terms like patience and generosity, because those things are not the qualities of coddling. And coddling is the thing that people are like, we can't coddle people. Okay. But we're not being generous and just not shaming folks for what they didn't know when they're steeped in all these shitty things that we all breathe in, like secondhand smoke here. Like, how is that useful? And I appreciate that your attention is on what moves us forward, like what gets us closer to where we want to be.
Well, because shame drives so much of that, right? People are so ashamed that they ever didn't know and that they had to learn. And we just export that shame onto each other over and over again. And, at a certain point, you have to be like, okay, enough shame. I think everyone's got plenty. Let's cultivate some other resource here.
Well, and I think humility is actually the bridge between shame and accountability, right? Because it's like, okay, I don't mind being held accountable, because I'd much rather be that than continue doing harm because I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, and I don't have to feel shame about that. But I mean, that takes an enormous amount of unpacking.
It takes so much unpacking. And I think there's something really powerful right now about, the places where I see folks like, no, we need to hold a hard line. Often those places are like, we need to hold a hard line because folks their co-optation is very real, right? Like, folks will take something that was like, this was supposed to be for justice or for people trying to move justice. And they'll take that and misapply it, misuse it. One of the tricks of capitalism is that it's so good at taking everything that moves against it and co-opting it into something that it can now use to move forward. And So I'm like, when I see people saying, no, 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 we need to hold accountability around that kind of stuff. I'm like, sure, I'm here for it. Right. Like, I'm with you on that. I agree. And the places where I tend to be like, no, you lost me, are when I see people moving in ways that don't allow for the like root system to actually connect to anything. And that's when I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Like, if the only thing you know how to do to produce in yourself and others is shame, then you've gotten fully caught up in that system.
Right.
And capitalism is so good at producing shame. So good at it, right? Because like, as long as you feel ashamed, you will buy something to try to make you a better person. And I'm like, one of the things I'm like, we constantly have to be paying attention to as folks who are inviting folks to change is like, how do we evoke changes that are not rooted in people feeling ashamed of how they were shaped?
Totally.
A lot of it is like, we have to understand how we were shaped in order to shape something else. And like, that requires curiosity. So yeah. Full circle.
Love that. I'd love to geek out on embodiment with you. You have a whole section, cymatics, and this is one of those things that emerged. So when I started creating my Wild Soul Movement body of work, there were all these things that I had no context or reference point for, that I had not learned anywhere, that I just started doing. And then gradually over the course of time, I'm like, oh, cymatics is the whole thing. Like,
yes. I had similar experience.
Yeah. And it's so validating and so exciting to be like, wait, there's science to support this thing that I thought I was just trying out.
Yes.
So freaking
That's
cool.
Beautiful.
So for you, what is the role that embodiment plays in your life and in your work?
These days, I would say it's like everything. It feels like it really is at the heart of my life. It really is at the heart of my life. So I am a student of generative cymatics and a practitioner with a group called BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, which is moving the concepts of cymatics alongside the concepts of transformative organizing and political education. And I feel like so long what I was actually longing for was exactly the things that I get to practice all the time now.
Yeah.
Which is like, I want to feel alive in real time. I want to feel alive and feel in touch with my intuition.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, it layers and layers and layers. And I feel so grateful to be in the layers, practicing the layers, right? Like, now I feel like I spend a lot of my time on purpose and in conversations and relationships that I want to be in because of embodiment. And then I think one of the things that gets taken from us by oppression, by the layers of capitalism, is the idea that we can experience pleasure and joy and embodiment in these current bodies. That it's not something that's just, set aside for future generations someday to get to have, but that it's actually possible in the here and now, and that we have to begin to practice it. So embodiment to me, the way I feel like I've gotten there was by dropping into the rigor of practice. And now I'm like such a practice head. I'm like, that's where I begin almost every conversation of coaching or support with people. It's like, what are you currently practicing? What do you want to be practicing?
Yeah.
What do you need to practice in order to actually get free? Right? So many of us are like, I want to be free, but we don't practice freedom. We don't practice, we want abolition, but we don't practice anything other than punishing and canceling each other. We want to have a functional democracy, but we don't practice making decisions together. And so the contradiction in that eventually gets too intense to carry, right? It gets too heavy. So I feel like embodiment has become a core piece of it. And it's such a beautiful way to have people come together. I get really excited by like what can happen with a body of people moving in some kind of unison, and unison at the level of the body, singing together, breathing together, moving together, flocking together. I'm like, oh, flocking is a choice. Not every species makes it and not every species survives, but those that make it almost always survive. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And like that comes from being able to listen rather than being able just to purely strategize. I think what's happened is we've gotten really good at strategy and urgency. Mm-hmm. And in movement space, you know, everything is actually urgent. Like everything is actually a crisis. So it becomes really important to be able to pull apart or pull aside, like urgency thinking is part of how we got here. We have to learn how to feel something that moves slower than urgency, and then let that inform our strategies if we hope to get different results.
We have to feel something that moves slower than urgency. That is amazing.
Yes. Thank you. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited to like know that that's true and then try to practice it.
And that, to me, I find, so I had been running this online program for many years, and this was the first year I decided to make it a whole year. And there was part of me that was like, I don't know if people are going to want to commit to a full year. And I'm like, but what we need to commit to is a lifetime. So a year is a great start.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
Everything
great.
takes longer than we want it to. And another thing I loved about emergent strategy is it's so rooted in nature as a teacher, right? So my favorite rules of nature, I always say nature doesn't do anything fast. She's the queen of using what she has. She doesn't take more than she needs. And actually she doesn't do anything fast except destruction,
Yeah.
I have all these plants in my house, and anyone who's ever been in any of my programs knows that I use my plants for metaphors all the time. I'm like, something's always growing, dying, and in process at the same time. Like we are like that.
It's true.
So freaking true. So I'm curious. I want to come back. It's on this similar to the embodiment thread, but it goes back to something you were saying earlier about being seen. It's such a like foundational human need to be seen. And so many people think that they want to be seen in this context of leader, organizer, or influencer, someone with a platform, someone with a brand. But it actually is so taxing on the nervous system. Like,
that's right.
I did a photo shoot last week, and then I had a vulnerability hangover for 4 days.
I know about that.
I'm like, yo, this is not everything it's cracked up to be in so many different ways. So I'm curious how you use embodiment specifically to tend to your nervous system around being seen as you step into the world, as you do bigger things or things spread in ways that you couldn't have anticipated.
That's such a good question. I feel like a lot of it has been taking time away, like really giving my body time to remember that I exist outside of anyone else's gaze.
Yes.
Because it can get alarming how quickly you can forget that completely. Yes. And like, I'll notice in myself that tendency toward like, oh, this just happened. Like I took a step. Should I post that on the gram? Like, should I let someone know? Like, did I take the step if no one saw it?
Is it real?
So,
Did this even really happen?
Exactly. So my new friend, Matt McGorry, who is the How to Get Away with Murder.
I know Matt.
Yeah.
I'm in LA.
So Matt is so dope. And it's been fun getting to know him and getting to know a few people. Like I've been getting to know him and Esperanza Spalding and a few other people who are like, I'm like, you have fairly recently also made this transition. Like, what the fuck, but he's been doing this really cool practice of telling people like, get off Instagram for the weekend.
Yeah. I saw that the other week.
And I recently, like while I was finishing this last book, I went to a place where I couldn't get a signal. And so I couldn't get online and it was for days. It was like almost an entire week that I was offline. And I didn't feel like I thought I would, which is desperate, like desperate and bored or, I was worried, right? That I'm like, I turned to this thing so quickly and what it'll be like to not have it around. And it was awesome, right?
Yeah.
It was immediately awesome because it was like immediately, oh, right, my brain is also full of really cool thoughts and I now have more room for them and I'm having deeper conversations and I'm having what I think of as just lost time, where I'm just like looking into space and letting things come through, letting ideas come through, letting feelings come through. It takes time to process feelings. And so I've been like, really, I do a bunch of that, to teach somatic work, you have to be doing somatic work. That's the arrangement we're in. So I have been taking classes and I'm in a course this year that has been blowing my mind and blowing my body and really teaching me so much about what's still sitting inside of me, holding space from my trauma experiences.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a Virgo, so I'm like, I did that. I did a whole session on that. So that should be done.
Right.
And it's so beautiful how the body is like, no, bitch, that's not how it works.
That was cute, but no.
That was cute, you know, and that was a beginning, or that was the next step.
Yeah.
And then there's like, you know, 3,000 more steps. And because that's kind of the technology numbers for the methodology that I'm in, is 300 practices is what gets you muscle memory, and 3,000 practices is what gets you embodiment. So if you want to embody a healed form, you have to be in the practice so many more times than feels comfortable or logical or fair. And I have been that's been a big part of my humbling in this process. I also do some practices around what I take in and take on as mine, and what I let, what I really let just go past me or go on. So like what I mean by that is people will tell me this work changed my life, or what they'll say is you changed my life.
Right.
And then what I do inside of me is like, thank you for letting me know that, but I pass it on. Right. Yeah. So I'm like, Octavia, Audrey, did you hear that? Grace, you know, to the ancestors, you know, the people who shaped me, like I try to pass it back because I'm like, y'all shaped me, and that shaping has reached this other person. Yeah. Cool. Right. And try not to hold it as my own. I also do a practice of embodiment where I drop stuff down to the earth. And I'm not sure how to quite describe it, but it's just something I discovered in life in my centering practices was like, there's always this massive earth under me, and it can hold anything. So when people come at me with what feels like way too much, you know, because we all want something to worship. And so people will come at me with like these really intense, worshipful energies that I'm like, honey, I'm not, you know, I'm not any more or less divine than anyone else. So I can't carry all of that. I can't carry it. It's too heavy. Yeah. So, but the earth can hold anything, right? Like I'm like, the earth, she's out here holding mountains. She's like holding oceans. She can hold this. And so that has been a really helpful practice, is to drop stuff back down into the earth and just be like, okay, whatever this is, I don't think it really has to do with me. And I know it's too heavy for me. Totally. So hold this, you know? And she's such a good partner in that way. Like I can really count on her. She's always there. I'm never too far away to drop something down into the earth. So those kind of things have been really helpful for my body. And then I do a lot of body work. Like I actually go get a shit ton of body work from different healers and let people hold me so that I can release stuff. Yeah. You know, there's so much, like I've experienced a lot of fear that I wasn't expecting, because suddenly when people recognize you everywhere you go, it really shifts your sense of like just safety to be, safety to exist, right? Yeah. And you know, there's been places where I've been where I'm like, I am naked. I'm naked. I'm at a hot springs or a bathhouse or something, and someone will come up and be like, I recognize you, and they're wanting to have a positive experience with me, and I'm like, I'm naked. I'm naked. I don't know you. Yeah. And the whole, you know, my arrangement of coming to these places is not that I want to be recognized and have to interact with people, but the opposite. You know, I'm like, I want to come here and be anonymously naked and just take care of myself, you know? So there's been really interesting stuff like that where I'm like, okay, how do I inside myself create more of a boundary, create more of a border? Do I need to make some different choices? Do you know what I mean? Like stuff like that where I'm like, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to navigate this particular situation.
I imagine you probably have this experience too, but I won't project it on you. I'll let you tell me. Sometimes I get an idea that's just like this little droplet from the divine, and I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And I don't necessarily know why, or I think I know why, but then like 17 other more important reasons of why will later emerge. And so earlier this year, when I was feeling like really angsty about social media, it was when I decided to do these embodiment videos. I'm like, you know what? Let me just show people my practice and And in that, because one of the things that I always continually reminded is part of my being here is to be like a walking permission slip for others, not to go, hey, everyone be like me, but to be like, hey, everyone this is me being more me, you be more you, like let's jump in the
exactly.
sandbox together and play and be ourselves. So, that's why I started posting the embodiment videos more frequently. But then I'm realizing now that it's almost been a whole year, 10 months, we're going on month 11 now, that it was also calibrating my system for being seen. Because one of like that thing that you just mentioned, I still I have a sizable platform here and there, I'll be recognized, but I still enjoy a good amount of anonymity that I have been just holding on to, because I'm like, oh, but it's coming up on time to let that loosen that grip a little bit. So I appreciate you sharing those things as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's been an interesting journey. I, for a long time, share pictures of myself, my body that I'm working to get comfortable in. Mm-hmm. And it's been so fascinating to be like, oh, just now that I'm like, okay, the number of people who are going to see this is much, much, much bigger. And I don't know most of them, right? When I started out on social media, I knew the people that I was in relationship with. So that was one choice that I made at a certain point for the sake of emergent strategy was, I'm going to actually open this up so that I don't have to know and approve of every single person who follows me, right? That was a choice. And there's been other choices that I made, but I put a lot more time and thought into each of those choices now than I used to. Yeah. And that feels like the right call. I'm learning. And I do feel like I've learned so much about boundaries.
Yeah.
So much about boundaries. Whew. And that boundaries, because for a long time, I thought there was nothing I could do about the fact that people were always approaching me, right? People were coming up to me on a regular basis and telling me that they loved my work, that I was beautiful, that this, that. And it's confusing, right? Because I'm like, oh, is all that true about me? Or is that some projection, or I'm feeling something for them? And especially the more, I started to really embrace myself as a big woman, people would just come up and be making comments about my body that I think for them were informed by the fact that it's oh, she's comfortable with her body. And so I guess I can talk about it now. Right. And which is such an interesting thing to me. I'm like, oh, that is not what I meant. So, it's just stuff like that where I'm like, oh, me being confident in my body and wearing things that let I feel confident in my body is not an invitation to my body. No. That's my expression outward. And so I just learned a lot more around boundaries and how to be comfortable in my body without people having to comment on it or ask for my attention or make moves on me or anything like that.
Totally.
And it felt better to do that. And it felt important. It has felt very important to me to do that, not in the context of, how to say this? It's felt important to me to do that, not in the context of giving people, I don't want to be teaching people all the time.
Right.
About anything, and I don't want to be in a place where I am judging people all the time or having to assume or navigate. Right. I want to be able to be in authentic relationships with the world and invite authentic relationships from the world. So it's been interesting. And I want boundaries to allow me to have more room to say yes to the things I really want to be doing.
Yes.
So I feel like that's what I've gotten to now is that I'm like, oh, I can set this boundary and the boundary will allow me to be more in touch with myself and more in touch with the people that I really, really care about and want to give my time to.
Okay. So hearing you say this reminds me, I hope you really enjoy this. A dear friend of mine is a huge fan of your work and she met you after, I think she'd come to one of your classes or a training or something. And I don't remember the specifics and I'm not going to try to fill it in, but I remember her telling me she learned an enormous lesson about boundaries by watching you say no to someone. With so much grace and so much just self-honoring. She was like, I didn't even know you could do that.
That makes me so happy because I try to do it more and more often and try to think less and less about it. When I feel a no, I say a no.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time. Like when I'm facilitating a space, it's like people are never done with their questions. Sometimes you
Right.
just have to end it anyway, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, just being like, no,
Yeah.
no is the truth of this moment. No.
Good.
Right. And just let it be, let it live, and
Yeah.
trust that like people will be okay. Like I've received a lot of no's in my life and somehow I've survived.
Oh, we're all going to be okay. So we're coming up on our hour. I know you have a flight to catch. So just the last thing I want to ask, my conversations are always kind of emergent like this. We hit on
That's
a
so
bunch of
cool.
things. It's super fun.
Yeah.
But based on everything we've talked about, is there anything I didn't ask you, or any like thought or feeling or something that you want to share to like tie it all together, or anything before we sign off?
No, I feel like really satisfied. I think this was a really good conversation. It was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So everyone listening, you can find Adrienne Maree Brown on Instagram. We're going to put links to everything, all the books, everything you've got going on in the show notes. I highly suggest. I do love following you on Instagram. That's where I keep in touch. And if you are
It's my favorite place.
If you are in the community of Virgos, where we can't get enough of how Virgo we are, I love that
Exactly.
you
I'm
also
always
have
posting about it.
a highlight
So
in your Instagram profile for all the Virgo memes. They bring me so much joy.
exactly. I'm just like, wait, there's like whole systems. There's people who are just spending all their time creating brilliant memes about all the signs. And,
It's so
the
amazing.
Virgo ones really serve me.
Me too.
So yes.
Thank you so much. All right, Adrienne, this was a pleasure. Have amazing, safe travels. Enjoy your sabbatical. We will talk to you later.
Sweetie. Talk to you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
I forgive, I'm done. But then your body may not have caught up to that. There may be a part of your body that's like,
Totally.
hell no, we are so angry. Oh my God. Or whatever scenario, whatever situation, whether it's like the death of a person, or even like how it felt to have an alcoholic mother when you were 11 years old, or like how you felt about your body and your eating disorder when you were 18 years old. Like there's so much that we harbor that's incompleted that carries through.